So next I'll talk about section 1, or Ichidan. And if you have your handout, you could also read from your handout or read along with me on the slide. Back then, this man, newly come of age, went hunting on a place of his in the village of Kasuga, near the Nara capital. In the village lived 2 very pretty sisters. She spied on them through a crack. Their looks were so surprisingly out of keeping with the rustic surroundings that he couldn't contain himself. He cut a piece from the hem of his hunting cloak, wrote a poem on it, and had it taken to them. His hunting cloak was printed with a shinobu leaf tangle pattern. Young Murasaki, sprung from Kasuga meadows, you impress my cloak with such shinobu tangles, they will never come undone. Kasuga no wakamurasaki no surikoromo, shinobu no midare kagiri shirarezu. Off it went to them, just like that. He must have felt this was the time for a touch of shinobu pattern printed in Michinoku. Who then is to blame for so tangling my heart when I know it is not I? Michinoku no shinobu mojizuri, tare yue ni midare some ni shi ware naranaku ni. People back then were so impetuously elegant. So I have here, this is, the slide here is a nara ehon, as it's called, a particular kind of book that has pictures in it, nothing to do with Nara or the Nara period in particular. It's just come to be called that. But this one is held by the Yale University Beinecke Library. And it's very nice, so I've included it in the pictures here to give a little bit of a visual image. We can also see, well, for example, there's the man here giving a poem to the lady's servant. We can see the deer in the corner that he's been hunting, and then we can see the sisters in the back waiting. Here's another example from the Ise Monogatari Emaki scroll version held by the Ono family. And we can see that many of these images are shared between the different drawings. This Sagabon, as it's called, the Saga printed edition, was also very influential, and we can see that it was the Yale version is very similar to this. You can click on these or type in these addresses here to see these works in more detail. So in this episode and in the poem, we see the reference to the Shinobu Mojizuri, or Surikoromo Shinobu no Midare. So in present day Fukushima, there you can go and look at this stone that is said to be associated with the poem that appears in the Tales of Ise. And you could also look at these web pages for more detail. But one theory is that the cloth was spread over the rock, and using ferns, this plant here on the right side of the slide, using the shinobu ferns to make a dye, D-Y-E, to dye the cloth, and that was the shinobu dyeing process. So it may be referring to this, but this is convenient as a kakekotoba, or in English, a pivot word, one word that can have two or more meanings. Shinobu referring to the fern, and shinobu also referring to long for or to love, and it can also mean to hide. So this is used in the poem. Matsuo Basho in Oku no Hosomichi, the narrow road to the deep north, also wrote about visiting this stone. And if you want, you can read more in Oku no Hosomichi. In the Ise Monogatari section 1, there's two poems, both described as being presented by the Narihira hero character. But actually, the second poem appears in the Kokinshu, and there it's said to be written by Minamoto no Toru. And Minamoto no Toru and Narihira were almost the same age. So it's very unlikely that Narihira actually knew about a poem by Minamoto no Toru and then used it when he was visiting these two sisters. So probably these poems were just added to make an interesting story for Ise Monogatari. I've put the poem here twice because the version in Ise Monogatari, Midare Somenishi, is different from the version in the Kokinshu, Midarem to Omou. The word somenishi is nice because some means to begin, or to begin, so to begin to have tangled feelings. But it can also mean to dye, D-Y-E, as in dye something, dye the fabric, dye the cloth of a certain color. The image here on the left is a Hyakunin Isshu image, and you may know this poem from being included in Fujiwara no Teika's Hyakunin Isshu. Narihira also has a poem included in Hyakunin Isshu, this one, which is from section 106 of Ise Monogatari. And this one also in modern versions, we'll see the poem as the one on the bottom, with the verb being read kukuru. Chi hayaburu kami yo mo kikazu tatsuta gawa kara kurenai ni mizu kukuru to wa. So kukuru meaning to dye something, again, a kind of dyeing something the red color of the autumn leaves. However, in the Heian period, this word kukuru was often read kuguru, because in old times when writing Japanese, they didn't use the dakuten. They didn't use the dots to show the difference between ku and gu. You just needed to know by context. So in this case, kuguru means to go underwater. So to me, it's very interesting that the historical chance of using the dakuten dots or not using the dots has created two different poems, both very nice. But modern scholars today will use the bottom one, even though the top one was used during the Heian period. And here is the context, which where this poem is included in the Kokinshu. if you look at the preface, you see that it was a poem written on the topic of autumn leaves floating down the Tatsuda River as painted on a screen at the residence of the Nijo consort, Nijo no Kisaki, when she was known as Mother of the Crown Prince. So here's another Hyakunin Isshu image. This one shows Narihira looking at the screen. The Nijo consort was also called Fujiwara no Takaiko or Takako, and she is the one who appears in the early sections of Ise Monogatari that causes the protagonist to get in trouble and go to Azuma.